Just checking to make sure the sound is okay. And also just first things first, we'd like to let you know that we're going to be recording today's public meeting. So that has been done.
Not yet. Pam, can you please start the recording?
It is started.
All right, thank you. So first of all, we'd like to welcome everybody to the public meeting we're having today on the Clean Transportation Fuel Program. We know that there are many ways you can spend your time, and we really appreciate that you've chosen to spend the time with us here learning about this program, and also recognizing that our discussion draft rules for this program are out for public comment. Now, I'd like to go on to talk a little bit about the Spanish interpretation option for today's meeting. So next slide, please. And Lisa, if you would like to say provide some information to those of us who are joining us who prefer Spanish as their primary language.
Good afternoon. In order to choose your language for the language channel that you would like to listen to, you'll need to go to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and there's the globe. If you can please click the globe if you would like to listen to English, and if you would like to listen to in Spanish, you can choose Spanish. Para alguien que quiera escuchar la interpretación al español, por favor mire en la esquina inferior a la mano izquierda y va a ver el mundo. Si puede hacer clic en el mundo y luego puede seleccionar su idioma, el español.
Anybody who feels like they're having trouble accessing the language channel that they'd like to raise their hand if that's necessary. And maybe those of us here, all the team who's logged in, can check all the participants and see if anybody is having trouble accessing the channel that they would prefer. And also, I'm noticing that some people are joining us, and welcome, but please do make sure your mic is muted. Being on camera is great if you choose to, but you do have to be, obviously. But please do mute your mics. All right. So welcome again. I'd like to introduce the great team we have here at the Environment Department that's been working on these rules. First of all, if you are a member of the team, would you please just come on camera, maybe raise your hand if you want, or you can use your raise hand function. Our team here at the Climate Change Bureau and at NMED has been growing, and I'm very, very proud of the work that we've been doing to get these rules ready and also and to prepare for this public meeting. When we move into the question and answer phase, any one of the team here may answer the questions. But first off, I'd like to introduce Michael Ford and Colt Vaughn, who are going to be giving the presentation. But I also just want to say just a tiny bit more before we get to that, which is that we're here to discuss the Clean Transportation Fuel Program, which is a policy that was, as you'll hear in a moment, approved by the legislature last year. It is a fairly complicated policy. And if this is your first engagement with the Clean Fuel Program, you may find yourself with more questions than answers. Certainly how many of us started our journeys. And it may take some time and commitment to understand the details of this policy, including the specifics that we're proposing in these rules. Louder. Okay. Fortunately, many resources are available to assist you should you wish to increase your understanding of the Clean Fuel Program policies after today. We have a website that is full of information, including a 2-minute video about how clean fuel programs work. And of course, we want to avail ourselves to you should you wish to set up any follow-up meetings to find out more about the program. And the last thing I'd like to touch on is that we're all here today because we care about New Mexico. We care about our families, our friends, the air we breathe, the water that gives us life, and our beautiful spaces. So we respectfully request that we all take utmost care to treat each other with the respect that we're each due, even if we have differing opinions. I think we can best find the best solutions for New Mexico when we have respectful conversations. So in just a moment, we're going to launch into a presentation that Colt and Mike will give. After that, we'll have time for Q&A. You can enter your questions in the chat anytime throughout the presentation, but we won't get to them until the end unless we feel like there's a clarifying question that would make sense to answer in the moment. At that point, during the Q&A part of this meeting today, Becky will provide the questions. We'll read out your questions and ask the appropriate team member to answer them. We just want to note that we're not taking public comment today via this public meeting. However, you still need to talk louder? Would increasing my volume make a difference? No? No. Is that better? Who knows? Yes. That's better slightly. Okay. I just want to mention that there is a way for you to provide public comment on our discussion rule draft. Both Mike and Colt will provide those exact details. But today is more about answering questions than providing comments. All right, with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Colt.
And before we dive in, let me just change my microphone setting real quick. Okay, can we get some feedback? Are you able to hear us okay with this microphone? Excellent. All right. Sounds like everybody can hear us very well. Okay, Mike, if you'll go to the next slide, please. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Colt Vaughn. I am an environmental scientist and the rulemaking project manager for this rule. And I just wanted to start us off with a little bit of background. So many of you may have seen that we released a discussion draft rule of the Clean Transportation Fuel Program. And that, I just want to make it clear that it is a discussion draft. And the reason we put it out is because we are aiming to take your input so that we can craft the rule in a way that suits New Mexico in the best possible way. So I do want to be clear that this is not a proposed rule yet. After we collect input and we consider that input and make changes to the rule, then we will propose a rule for the Environmental Improvement Board to consider. So we're here again to listen to you all today. After we give this presentation, we want to make sure we have time to hear what your input is. And the way, the form that input is going to take is there's a public comment portal that is on our website. I'll provide some information later in the presentation on how to access that. And we really are asking for you all to ask questions so that we can answer them during this meeting. But we want to make sure that if you have actual input to contribute about the rules or the program itself, we're asking that you write that down and submit it in our public comment portal. That way we make sure that we hear your voice. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to begin the presentation.
Hello, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Ford. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Cole, for the excellent introductions. It's a pleasure to be here, and just to reiterate, I'd really like to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to come learn about this policy. It's rather complex. We're going to roll our sleeves up and get into the nitty-gritty here. But first, before we do that, I want to give a little bit of context about where we're coming from with this clean transportation fuels program. We should turn back the clock to 2019. The governor signed an executive order that year that set out a target to reduce greenhouse gas reductions in the state of New Mexico to 45% below 2005 levels across the entire economy of the state by the year 2030. Those climate commitments to reducing our GHG emissions were further strengthened by the U.S. Climate Alliance, an alliance of 24 states and territories that have committed to acting decisively on climate change, regardless of federal policy. As a member of the U.S. Climate Alliance, New Mexico has committed to a further reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to over half of 2005 levels by the year 2030, and then 3/5 to 2/3 of a reduction below 2005 levels by 2035, while hitting net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, you might be saying, holy moly, that is a huge commitment to reducing greenhouse gas reductions. How are we doing so far? So when we compare the 2005 levels, which is the baseline year for all of our reduction commitments, we have thus far achieved a significant reduction through the year 2021. Now, if you look at this graph below that goes through emissions reductions by sector, 2005 are the black bars. Those are historical data. 2021, the orange bars, are the most recent historical data. And 2025, or our projected reductions by 2025, are these light blue bars. Our projections for 2025 across the whole economy are for a 29% reduction below 2005 levels through the end of this year, accounting for our fuel mix, our expected economic activity, and policies such as this one. As a point of reference, you're going to say 29%. That seems like a lot. Is it good? Answer is absolutely. The United States, as part of its commitments under the Paris Agreement, targeted a 26 to 28% reduction below 2005 levels by 2025. So with things going as they are right now, we're on pace to slightly exceed our nation's Paris Agreement goal. Turning to this graph below, as I mentioned, we have historical data. The black bars are 2025, orange, the most recent historical 2021, and blue, the projections through the end of this year. One important thing to notice is we are ordering these reductions by economic sector, from the smallest emitters all the way to the left, moving rightwards to the largest emitting sectors. The three largest emitters in our state are electricity generation, transportation, and the oil and gas sector. One thing you'll notice with electricity generation, third from the right, and oil and gas, all the way to the right, is those two sectors have had some pretty significant reductions and are projected to fall by a very large amount through the end of this year. By contrast, transportation, the sector second from the right, has been a bit more intractable, a bit harder to make headway in reductions in the transportation sector. So we have addressed that in the state of New Mexico during this administration through two principal policy measures. The first one is the new motor vehicle emission standards, which are also known as the Clean Cars and Clean Trucks Rule, or Clean Cars 2 and Clean Trucks Rule. And those standards require a certain percentage of new vehicles brought into the state to be zero emission, brought into the state for sale to be zero emissions vehicles, or ZEVs. Combined with that, so we're selling a lot more ZEVs or we will be signing a lot more ZEVs as a result of that policy. In addition to that, you might ask, well, that's great in terms of changing your vehicle fleet to cars and trucks that emit less, but what about your fuels? And that's where this policy comes in, that functions alongside our motor vehicle emissions or clean car and clean trucks rule. So let's get into this policy a little bit. This policy was passed by the New Mexico State Legislature in the 2024 legislative session under House Bill 41. We are now in the 2025 session, so that is the last time I will be saying House Bill 41, because there is another House Bill 41 this session, and I don't want to confuse people. This past session, passing that standard, which is known as the Clean Transportation Fuel Standard, or the CTFS, which establishes our target transportation reductions, made New Mexico the 4th U.S. state with such a policy, which is pretty groundbreaking, and the first non-coastal state with such a policy, I might add. Under this statute, there is a mechanism by which we develop what is known as the Clean Transportation Fuels Program, or CTFP. The CTFP are the rules and regulations that we in the executive branch establish that accomplishes the statutory goals set by the state legislature. All of our authority for everything we're going to talk to you about today comes from that statute. So in the CTFP, we hem closely to the statutory mandates that we and authority that we have from the CTFS. The statute requires that the Environmental Improvement Board, or EIB, promulgate the rules for the CTFP no later than July 1st of 2026. And there are 10 provisions under the statute that guide our efforts to making the CTFP, which is ensconced within the Environmental Improvement Act in the state laws of New Mexico. So let's go through those 10 provisions and what we are doing with the CTFP to accomplish those 10 goals set out in the CTFS. The first goal, and perhaps the most important one, is decreasing carbon intensity. That sounds a little nerdy, so I'm going to get into some details and hopefully break it down for you. I'll start off by saying what this does not do. By decreasing emissions in the transportation sector, we are not telling anybody what fuel to buy. We are not putting any limits on how much people can travel. We are not putting any limits on any type of fuel that is sold in the state. All we are doing is establishing a level of a carbon footprint for the fuels that are consumed in the state, which is to say the emissions from cradle to grave, or as the rule says, well to wheel, of the fuels that are brought here or produced here for sale. We have a sliding scale where there are two main targets established by statute, or the CTFS. The first is a 20% reduction in the carbon intensity or carbon footprint of transportation fuels by 2030 compared to 2018 levels. The second is a 30% reduction in the carbon footprint or carbon intensity by 2040 compared to 2018 levels. Those are the two main targets established in the Clean Transportation Fuel Standard passed by the legislature. For the Clean Transportation Fuels Program, or the rules that we are making, we establish how to get to those targets, with how to get to those more general targets with specific annual targets that must be met each year. Those establish a curve or a glide path for how clean our transportation fuels in the state get and how quickly they get that clean. You'll notice, because this is all compared to 2018 levels, that when you look at this graph, which shows the percent reduction compared to 2018 levels, we start this year, 2025, on the left. We go all the way out to 2040 on the right. We start at about a 2% reduction, just because natural economic forces and technology have reduced our carbon footprint, our carbon intensity by about 2% compared to 2018 already by like now. Then we establish a glide path for getting to that 20% reduction by 2030. How do we get a reduction if we're not mandating how much people consume, or we're not telling people how much to drive? We get to that reduction by saying that there are certain fuels, and we measure that well-to-wheel or cradle-to-grave carbon intensity, like gasoline and diesel, that are almost certainly going to be above these carbon footprint or carbon intensity standards. We tell the producers of those fuels that they have generated deficits. And in the CTFP, we establish markets whereby those deficits are offset either by cleaning up their processes and or buying credits for fuels that are cleaner than our carbon intensity standard. Those fuels are credit generating. As this standard, of course, becomes stricter, certain fuels that perhaps generated credits in one year may not generate credits the next year. Furthermore, the deficits that need to get offset by purchasing credits will grow as the standard gets stricter. And that means demand for cleaner fuels and things like fuel supply equipment to provide those cleaner fuels to drivers becomes financially necessary, and through the transfers in this credit market become financially more viable to provide to New Mexicans at a lower cost. Cost is a key concern here, and there are different ways that we strive to contain cost effects as part of this rule. One of them is, you'll notice there are examples of credit generating fuels, such as electricity, if you get an electric vehicle, or drop-in biofuels, if you want to drop fuels into an existing combustion vehicle. We don't deem or determine or mandate what those fuels are. Our statute is different from the other 3 states, and that we have a requirement for tech neutrality. That means we don't pick winners and losers. The fuels that generate credits compete and sell credits to offset deficits at the best price possible for deficit generators, limiting the degree to which any part of this rule creates greater costs, and achieving climate reductions, which we want, at the lowest possible cost. And it's a policy that promotes efficiency by being tech neutral and letting the most economic alternative fuels be the credit generators. So that's one way that we contain costs. Another is for deficits that don't get offset at the end of each annual compliance period, and the compliance periods are calendar years. There is a credit clearance market where prices for credits are capped. So if markets get tight, i.e. there's a lot of deficits and people are scrambling for credits, we limit the degree to which that cost is actually imposed on the makers of gasoline and diesel or their drivers. The last 2 things that we do are we have in this policy a forecast deferral where we can look forward in time and we can say if there are world events or things that appear to make it a very difficult market for credits to offset deficits, we can use a circuit breaker effectively and defer the program. In addition, as the program is in a compliance year, if something happens, because we know how dicey and unpredictable fuel markets are, if something occurs that we did not foresee, we have the ability to do an emergency deferral on the spot to respond to changing circumstances and protect the commuters of New Mexico. I mentioned the term well to wheel a couple of times, and it's kind of the transportation version of cradle to grave, of how we determine emissions for each fuel that could be a credit generator or a deficit generator in this policy. When I say well to wheel, I'm saying the well part is kind of the start of production of a fuel, like its feedstock. For example, here we have biofuels where the feedstock could be corn, it could be switchgrass, it could be some other fuel that is used as a drop-in substitute for gasoline or diesel. There's the production or the well. We care about the emissions from the production of that fuel. That could be N2O from fertilizer used. That could be from land use change to produce these fuels. That could be from another number of different things that go into how these fuels are made. We strictly account for those emissions. We don't ignore them, and we make sure that these substitute fuels that are being sold as cleaner fuels really are. Then we look at transportation of the fuels, the blending of the fuels, and when they're refined into fuel and taken to a blending station, move to a pump. That's all the first half of well to wheel. It's called well to pump, making the fuel and getting it to where it can be supplied to a commuter. The second half of this whole equation is called pump to wheel. It's from the pump where people fill up to putting the fuel in their vehicle, to driving the vehicle, and emissions that may result from powering that vehicle. So you have two stages of well to wheel. Well to pump plus pump to wheel equals well to wheel. Another example will be electricity, which is somewhat unique because you can make electricity in a couple different ways. One way is you can make electricity for charging electric vehicles using power from the grid, in which case your well is all the generating stations that are putting your fuel, in this case, electrons, onto a power grid. Those generating stations obviously have emissions, so those are going to get counted in the well to pump portion of the equation. And there's also line loss from transmission, other things we need to think about there. Another alternative is you can put a solar panel on a vehicle charging station. In that case, you have no well to pump emissions. You've got a solar panel sitting on your station, charging with carbon-free electricity straight to your pump. In both cases, what they have in common, both the grid and putting a solar panel on your charging station, or what we call distributed renewables, is the pump to wheel emissions, supplying electricity from your charging station to a vehicle and driving that vehicle, are zero emissions. These are known as zero emission vehicles for a reason. They literally are. So that's another example of electricity. And we're just using these as examples. We are not being prescriptive. There are other alternatives that may also take shape. But that's just a quick overview of how accounting for this policy under the CTFP works to support the emissions reductions targets under the CTFS. Colt, take it away.
Sure, thank you, Mike. So Mike was just highlighting the first two really key statutory requirements. And I want to continue to highlight those 10. So picking up on number 3 here, we have requirements for regulating this new market that we are establishing. And so in our rules, you can find the examples of these in our discussion draft rule that's out right now. We have measures to make sure that we are doing that. A couple of examples, we require documentation to be submitted to the department to ensure that we account for those emissions in a valid way. We also have safeguards in place to ensure that we avoid double counting emissions. So I do want to be clear here that a credit that is generated under this program, that the fuel that went into generating that credit would not be eligible to participate and earn a credit in another program. So we make sure that we have ways of avoiding double counting in that way. We also have timelines for buying, selling, retiring credits that people earn. And we also have other opportunities to earn credits. It's not just about the fuel itself. There is a sort of sub-program that is called fuel supply equipment credits. And essentially the way that that sub-program operates is it allows people to earn credits for expanding the infrastructure that is necessary for to provide the clean fuels across the state of New Mexico.
I can say something real quick. One point that Colt illustrates there and that I want to underscore. There are numerous opportunities to generate credits under this program. All opportunities are linked to transportation fuels either imported into New Mexico or produced in New Mexico for sale. So when we say credit trading here, I want to be very clear. We aren't talking about like global offset markets of people buying credit for an acre of land in the rainforest that may or may not even, we're not getting into any of that. When we say credits, we are talking about very specifically fuel taken into New Mexico or produced in New Mexico, or equipment that allows that to take place. And that is the only way you can generate a credit. So this is a very specific material policy that is not subject to some of the critiques that you hear about when you talk about other sort of offset type programs. Just want to make that clarification.
Yeah, excellent point. Next slide, please. So we also have mechanisms in the rule to make sure that we verify that information. So on the last slide, I talked a little bit about the paperwork side of verification. We also have components in the rule to essentially certify and employ third-party verifiers so that they can go out and do field checks or facility inspections to verify that the information that we, the department, receive is indeed valid and consistent with the conditions that are actually being used to produce that fuel. So that third party is a neutral party. It's not anyone at the department, and it's not anyone that is subject to or opting into participation in this program. They are an unbiased third party who allows us to verify the compliance requirements of the rule. So along with that comes procedures for monitoring and verification. We have mechanisms to ensure compliance on an annual basis. And lastly, we have a mechanism for credit banking. And what the banking allows is for someone to earn a credit. They can choose to sell that or to hold on to it by banking it. If they hold on to it and bank it, they can choose to sell it later. And that allows people to try to maximize their revenue from this program. Right, please. So the statute requires some specific things of utilities, and utilities, first off, are able to opt into the program. They are not required to participate. However, utilities are likely to want to participate because they can earn revenue. If they opt into the program and they earn revenue, the statute and the rules require that they reinvest all of that revenue into the items you see on the screen here. So grid modernization, infrastructure, and distribution. Distribution deals with the hyperlocal infrastructure that ensures power goes out to our residential units and commercial units. There's also an opportunity for utilities to invest some of that revenue in other efforts that decarbonize transportation. One example of what a utility could invest in the other category could be their transportation electrification plan, and utilities transportation electrification plans look quite different, but it allows them to make investments for their customer base. Next slide, please. The other provision of utility revenue investments is that utilities must invest 50% or more of that revenue to support underserved communities. And I want to pause there and just highlight what that means. So an underserved community is an area of the state where there's a significant number of people who are considered low income. Low income is defined in the statute as people who are experiencing a poverty level greater than 200% of the federal rate. So the map that you see on the screen, I want to just highlight that the orange areas, regardless of the shade of orange, those are the areas characterized by zip code that we have identified as underserved communities. The beige color is areas that do not meet that criteria, and the more white color are areas that we just don't have the data for at this particular moment. Next slide, please. Okay, so to wrap up the statutory requirements, I just want to hit these 5 really quickly. Number 6 deals with the compatibility with other programs. So we have been spending a lot of time working with other states to understand how they implement and operate these programs. And we're making sure that we're learning from their mistakes that they may have had earlier on, and making sure that we adjust for those and try to avoid those mistakes in our program. It also, compatibility with other programs also means that we will be accepting pathway applications, which we haven't discussed yet, but we will accept pathway applications in New Mexico that are accepted in other states. So what that means is if a fuel provider is supplying a fuel to another state and able to earn credits in that state, we will accept that fuel here in New Mexico as well, with minor adjustments for things like transportation distance that can actually affect the total life cycle emissions. Number 7 deals with the equal treatment of fuels, regardless of where they are generated or produced. And so we have established that fuels that come from out of state are treated the same as those produced in state. That allows, for example, producers of ethanol, say in the Midwest, to be able to import that fuel into New Mexico and earn a credit for that. Number 8 deals with the advisory committee. So last summer, we actually hosted our first advisory committee. I think it was a huge success. We were able to gain a lot of input at the outset of this rulemaking from a lot of experts who work in the industry, who work for environmental nonprofits and other organizations, to make sure that we started this rulemaking process in a way that would lead us to the right place. So building on that in the rule, we will continue to have an advisory committee that is able to provide guidance to the department on the program's effectiveness. Number 9 deals with deferral mechanisms, and Mike highlighted this briefly earlier. The deferral mechanism is essentially an opportunity to hit pause on the implementation of this program if there is an emergency condition or a forecasted fuel supply shortage. So an emergency condition could be something like a natural disaster that affects global markets. We have the ability, if that happens, to hit pause and allow that emergency to sort of be worked out, for lack of a better term, before the program continues in effect. There's also the fuel supply shortage forecast, which allows us on an annual basis to estimate the expected number of expected volume of fuel that can come into the state, to make sure that there are indeed enough credits available to be purchased by the producers who earn deficits. So we have to be able to offset the deficits with an equal amount of credits so that the program can contain costs for the end consumer. And that mechanism allows that to occur. Lastly, we do have fees for the administration and enforcement of this program, and you can find those in our rule. All right, next slide, Mike.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight as well, as a result of this rule, other benefits. Obviously, the CTFS statutorily is a mandate to reduce greenhouse gas reductions, but the benefits of this rule, because We are sensitive to taking an all-of-government approach that also looks at the entire needs of every community in the state. We look at all aspects of the rule, and that includes those that are not directly related to greenhouse gases. One of these is, for example, energy and economic security, the transfer of funds from deficit to credit generating fuels also happens to be a transfer of funds that can give rise to a number of fuels that are made here in the United States and in New Mexico, and that protect us from a lot of the kind of headwinds of global energy markets and protect our commuters, importantly. New fueling infrastructure is kind of a benefit in and of itself. If you have PHEV or BEV, which are plug-in hybrid or battery electric vehicles as one example, and you want to go, or you're shopping for one and you'd go, oh, great, I found a vehicle in my price range. That's awesome, but where can I fuel this vehicle? There are provisions that specifically push suppliers of fueling infrastructure with incentives to build in areas that are less frequently trafficked and where the private market alone might not lead to building more of that infrastructure. So suddenly the person that finds a BEV or a PHEV or any other sort of zero emissions vehicle that's in their price range now goes, oh, holy cow, not only can I afford to buy this, I know exactly where I can stop to charge it on my way home from work. Improved air quality and health is a big one. That new fueling infrastructure that I just highlighted makes it possible for the goals of the new motor vehicle emission standards, Clean Cars 2 and Clean Trucks, to actually get carried out in real life. And that means that a lot of other co-pollutants from tailpipe emissions go down and have a big impact on a state like ours, where over their lifespan, 1 out of every 7 residents on average contracts some form of respiratory illness. And there's a lot of ground to be gained there. Consumer choice is one that is kind of highlighted with all the points previously made for enabling folks that would like to get an electric or zero emissions vehicle to do so. But not just that. If you have a combustion engine vehicle, there are also methods of generating credit for fuel that goes into those, or what are known as drop-in fuels that we've highlighted. Local startups and community investment are 2 big ones. I happen to have a friend, a former landfill scientist who lives in Tucumcari as one example, who would like to start up his own company that uses a eco-friendly and cutting-edge technology with fungi to digest anaerobically cow manure to produce biomethane in a more eco-friendly way than you traditionally hear about. This program provides a funding stream for him to start this company up and bring jobs to his community in Tucumcari, where economic development is a high priority. And finally, good paying jobs. There's a lot of different labor market needs, I'll say, and we have worked extensively with the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions, the New Mexico Higher Education Department's Adult Education Division, and many others to look into different ways to train up our workforce and get a lot of new jobs, providing fuel supply equipment and new fuels. I think since we're a little bit pressed on time, I love to go into detail about the good paying jobs and all these other choices. I have to move on for now, but would be happy to revisit during Q&A if it were of interest to the audience. And lastly, I want to touch on this final concern that was brought up extensively during legislative session and by others about gas prices. When we talk about the Clean Fuels program, it is very different than traditional like programs where the government charges fees for gas and diesel and collects the revenue. We don't see a dime from this program. These are transfers between suppliers of deficit fuels to cleaner fuels. There's only 3 other programs in the country that are like this. As I said, we are the 4th state, and the only evidence we have on gas prices from these programs is an examination of states that already have these policies. The one cross-variant regression analysis that takes into account this program, but alongside the main price drivers of gasoline, which are crude oil costs, distribution, marketing costs, refining costs, and state excise taxes. When we look alongside those four actual drivers of gas prices and include the Clean Fuels program, looking at evidence before and after states have it, there is no statistically discernible relationship between this program and gasoline prices, which is to say, the movement is less than regular statistical noise and is far outweighed by the four actual drivers of gasoline prices. It's a fact that we have cost containment mechanisms already that are inherent to the program that create competition to limit the price, any price effects, or limit the cost of achieving our greenhouse gas reductions in this program. That is by design. We have a credit clearance market with capped credit prices. We have deferral mechanisms, as Colt has mentioned. We have a lot of different mechanisms in this CTFP to protect consumers. Not only that, but in addition, a lot of suppliers of gasoline and diesel have adapted their business strategies to this program and are themselves looking at, and in fact have facilities that are producing cleaner gasoline and diesel substitutes. So they are not just looking at this program as a cost on their balance sheet. Many of them are making money back by transforming their operations and moving to cleaner fuels, which is kind of the idea. But another benefit of that is it reduces the degree to which this program impacts any costs for gasoline and diesel users. So with that, I turn it back over to Colt to go over the rulemaking timeline.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I just want to wrap up quickly here with a couple of key points about the rulemaking process itself. So I mentioned earlier that we hosted that advisory committee back in July. That committee produced a technical report, which is available on our website. We used a lot of that information to work on producing a discussion draft rule, and that we released that on December 20th, just a few weeks ago. And since then, we have been taking input on the discussion draft rule. So obviously, we're here in January 2025, hosting some public meetings about these rules so that we can get the word out and make sure that we're able to collect that input. After we collect that input, we will consider it and figure out the best rule that we can put forward in petition to the Environmental Improvement Board. And we expect that we can maybe do that in February, although it's still to be determined a little bit. After we make that request, the board itself will set a hearing. We expect those dates to occur sometime this summer. And if the board chooses to adopt these rules, then we expect program implementation, including reporting and compliance, to begin in the fall of this year. Next slide, please. So I just want to highlight a couple of opportunities for public engagement. Number one, anyone who's interested in participating in the development of these rules can do so by requesting a meeting with us. The NMED website has a meeting request form. We ask that you fill that out. Just let in the form mention that you want to meet with the Climate Change Bureau, and we'll be happy to take a meeting with you. Once we have actually petitioned the board with the proposed rule, and the board has agreed to consider it, there will be more opportunities to engage with the board itself. So first, you will be able to provide comments to the board through a comment portal on our website again. Additionally, you will be able to appear at the rulemaking hearing itself, where you can provide a comment orally to the board for their consideration. Lastly, I just want to highlight that one of the best ways to stay informed about any information that we're sending out is to subscribe to our listserv on our Climate Change Bureau webpage. Next slide, please. And this is the last one. So I just want to highlight that we do have that discussion draft rule out. It's available right now. You can access it at that link or by scanning that QR code. And we're taking input through the smart comment portal at the QR code on the top. You can also visit the link that's listed there. That portal opened on December 20th when we released that discussion draft rule, and it closes on January 17th at 5 p.m. If you need any help accessing that, please let us know in the chat, and we may be able to help you figure that out today. So if you'll, I think we can leave this slide up, and I think we're going to take a brief break just to collect ourselves, and then we'll come back and take questions and answers. So let's break for 5 minutes. We'll come back at, I'm going to say 12:57. 12:57, we'll be back to begin with questions and answers. All right, thank you all very much. We'll be back in a moment. Coming back from our break, and Mike, if you will leave that slide up with the QR codes. I'm going to introduce Becky Smith. She is our Community and Engagement Support Section Manager, who will be helping us to field some of the questions today. Becky, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah, we got a yes.
Okay, thank you. So the first question we have is maybe a clarifying question. Why are you presenting 2021 projections for emissions when there is a 2024 inventory, which would have more recent data? And go for it, Claudia.
I would just ask that you turn your camera on when you're answering.
Only camera or also?
Camera only.
All right. Hello, everyone. So the question is about our emissions inventory, and some of you may know we just released the state's 2021 emissions inventory just before the holidays. And the inventory uses 2021 data, then was released, if you can do the math, about 2 years after the end of that period. The reason is that because the data that we use and that all states use and that the nation uses to calculate emissions inventories, there's a lag period between when the year ends and when that data is available. It can be as early as 3/4 of a year after, and sometimes as much as a year and a half after. So there's always a lag between the inventory year and the year in which the inventory gets made based on that data lag. Is there another part to that question, or is that?
Nope, I think that's it.
Okay, thanks.
The person who asked the question can reply if that was not sufficient. So the next question is, what happens if not enough credits are pledged into the credit clearance market and the deficit generator's proportional share of the credits are less than their deficit obligations?
I'm happy to take that one. So we have a forecast deferral where we look forward every year and we estimate the credits that can be supplied that year to consumers in New Mexico. We also, a third party will be doing these forecast reports. Objective third party will also be looking at the expected deficits based on our expected gasoline and diesel fuel consumption. When we ask ourselves whether credits can comfortably cover the expected deficits, we look at the market for those credit generating fuels, how those credits are accounted for, the CI, the carbon footprint of each fuel, how many credits they'll generate, and whether they, plus credits that are banked, which is important, can cover deficits. When I say banked, I mean there will be years, as we have observed in other programs, most likely, where more credits are generated than deficits. And the people that generate those credits go, hey, I couldn't sell my credit, but I really would like to get money for supplying clean fuel to the state. If that's possible, so we let them have a credit bank that carries forward year after year and helps for periods like the questioner is referring to, where there's a lot of deficits, to have a bank drawn on when we had excess credits previously that can help cover them. If after all of that, there is still there are still more deficits than credits, we reserve the ability, and we will see the signs long before we get there in the prices that would reflect that kind of a market, of calling for an emergency deferral that is a circuit breaker that we can use even in the middle of a compliance year to prevent us from ever getting to that situation.
Great, thank you. So then the next question that we have is, why would companies invest in certain renewable fuels, in certain renewable fuel projects for your program when the following year they may not be a credit generator?
I mean, I can speak to that. Investors are forward looking. They know about, in the CTFP, our glide path for carbon intensity. They have a rough idea of what carbon intensity their fuel is, and before they make large investments and go through permitting and all the steps needed to put steel in the ground, they need to think about, and do think about, whether that's a good investment or not. And so one would hope, if they're going to commit that kind of funding to a project to make clean fuels, that they have an eye to the future of how many credits those fuels can generate each year going forward and for how long, as that will be one method, in addition to the revenue from selling the fuel itself, which is a totally separate revenue stream. But they would be factoring all of that into their calculations for how to pay off their investment. So we don't make that choice for them. They are private operators. Private market takes risks, and we leave that to them. But one would assume that they do kind of take our program and its very transparent carbon intensity targets each year into consideration before they put that steel on the ground.
Okay, the next question is, have you considered any perverse incentives that might arise from this program? What safeguards are you putting in place to prevent bad actors from taking advantage?
I think that question is best answered by reviewing the enforcement section of the rule. So again, this rule is situated under the Environmental Improvement Act. That's the statute. And that statute is ultimately what governs the enforcement mechanisms that are available under the program. And maybe as a way to kind of summarize what that means, under the Environmental Improvement Act, there is absolutely the ability to impose fees or injunctive relief for non-compliance with this program. Claudia, do you want to add anything there? Or? Okay.
And I would just also say that we have pretty extensive applications. We have temporary carbon intensities in the rule in a lookup table. And in addition to that, to get a fuel pathway, which entitles you to earn credit for volumes of fuel supplied into New Mexico, we have a pretty extensive review process to approve your fuel pathway. And a lot of work goes into that, and effort and documentation that, while burdensome, gives us the information we need to do exactly what the questioner is saying.
Okay, great, thank you. So then the next question is, what types of infrastructure, for example, blender pumps, rail, transload skids above or below ground tankage, et cetera, are eligible for generating credits? Wait, Owen.
Sorry about that. I think we're better now. Can everyone hear me? Can I just do a quick sound check?
Sounds like we're good. to
Okay.
go, and-
We're good to go? Great.
Please introduce yourself. too.
Hi, hey, everyone. My name is Owen Peterson. I am a Clean Fuel Program Coordinator with the Climate Change Bureau under NMED. And it's a great question. Thanks for asking. Essentially, there are two types of credits in the CTFP. There are credits for actually producing or importing or dispensing fuel. So those are fuel-based credits. And then there are credits for building out fuel supply equipment. And so the types of infrastructure that were mentioned, I'll just repeat them: blender pumps, rail, transload skids, and tankage. Those types of infrastructure could generate credits indirectly by being part of a cleaner fuel production process and then putting that fuel onto market. But those types of infrastructure installed in and of themselves would not generate credits. We would not consider those fuel supply equipment or any other the other category of fuel-based credits that I mentioned. So I hope that answers the question there. Sounds like we're all good to go.
Thanks, Owen. So the next question is, what changes can an MED make after the rule per the recommendations of the advisory committee?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah.
Understand it?
The question is, what changes can NMED make after the rule per the recommendations of the advisory committee? I'm not sure.
Okay, I think that's a rulemaking question primarily. So the way that could theoretically work is that we would convene that advisory committee. They could provide guidance about how to tweak the program to make it work in a particular way. But those changes would not be implementable without us going through a new rulemaking process like we're doing right now. So there would be several layers of transparency, opportunities for public engagement to take those considerations to make those considerations. It would require there to be a rulemaking change by and large if there was something that the advisory committee recommends to the department to adopt.
Okay. So the next question is, given that public transit has the greatest impact on the carbon intensity of transporting people by eliminating nearly all the emissions associated with the alternative, which is driving a car, why is there no credit available for public transit agencies to incentivize them to increase the reach of their routes and increase total miles ridden on public transit?
Okay, thanks for that question. This is a clean fuel policy, right? So any fuel used is eligible to, any clean fuel used is eligible to earn credit. So we actually do see public transportation agencies as taking advantage and being a big winner when they choose to use clean fuels in their fleet. So for example, a lot of both, I know the city of Santa Fe and city of Albuquerque use compressed natural gas, which is a clean fuel currently, will be earning credits for that. And so they can then reinvest that money for all the kinds of programs that we all agree are good when it comes to reducing VMGs, vehicle miles
Travel.
traveled, thank you. That could include all the things suggested here, like expansion of the routes, perhaps even zero fare. I mean, the transportation agencies really do stand to get a new stream of income through this program that would allow them to do a lot of reaching the public and allowing for more transportation by public transportation.
I would also just add, those are all great mechanisms through which this can happen. We would presumably want to think about this in light of increasing those mechanisms such as ridership and routes compared to 2018, because that's the basis that we're accounting for improvements on all other fuels. So that is also something to take into account. Yes. 2018 is the baseline business, and it's how much all of these options, including public transit, we would think about improving relative to that baseline.
So, okay, can you better explain the mechanisms by which emissions are not double counted at each step of the fuel life cycle?
Let's talk about it. Maybe we could start by saying about how the emissions of a fuel life cycle are calculated. Right? We're using the national model, the R&D GREET model that's developed by Aragon Labs, and they break up the components of the emissions into each of the sectors that was shown previously in the slide with the graphics, right?
Should I go there?
And so so I'm not quite sure where the concern comes in that the emissions are double counted, because this is done very transparently in a model that gets used by many people throughout the country and developed by our national labs that determines the CI value for each of these. So I'm just quite not sure where the double counting might come in, but like Becky mentioned earlier, if you want to clarify why you think there would be double counting, I'm happy to see if we can take another stab at the question.
And I would just add briefly that the third-party verification mechanism is, I think, critical to ensuring that that double counting does not occur, because the third-party verifier is able to go out into the field and do those facility inspections to verify each piece of that life cycle process, and to ensure that each piece gets counted and in each of those get added up, ultimately totaling up the carbon intensity value.
And let me also just address the question about double counting in a couple other routes. One is, one of the ways in which double counting is allowed by the program is that a clean fuel that gets credit under the federal renewable fuel program is absolutely also allowed to get a credit in New Mexico if that fuel is sold in New Mexico for being a clean fuel and getting credits under that. So that's an example of double counting that this program absolutely encourages. It's a financial decision to produce and import clean fuels. And so those are two economic incentives that basically exist for that to happen. The other part of double counting that we avoid is that we don't want a fuel that is being that is seeking credit in New Mexico to also seek credit in one of the other states of this program. So we do collaborate with the programs in other states to make sure that certain fuels are not being double counted, once in New Mexico and once in California.
And I'll just add for that point, one key facet of the renewable fuels program federally, and this also has to do with using the renewable portfolio standard, is those programs wouldn't even, I don't think, be considered double counting, because they are not greenhouse gas measured as, they don't use greenhouse gas reductions as a unit of measurement in their programs. It's the percent of your fuel that is renewable, or the percent of your electricity that is renewable. So it's a separate measuring stick that they're using, so that it still is single counting, even if we recognize stuff that carries over from those programs.
Great. Okay, so the next question is, why does the draft assign carbon intensities that are negative? And what considerations go into making these ratings negative? There's a second part, why do these ratings only exist for agricultural biofuels?
Angela, I'm wondering if you might want to take that question. Give me one moment.
I can give it that one too.
Okay,
Don't transfer this, or yes, transfer this.
scoot it a little.
Why don't you come over here, Angela?
Sorry about this. I'm way at the end of the table away from the microphone for everyone online. I'm Angela Rasso with the Climate Change Bureau. So the question was about negative carbon intensities for agricultural biofuels.
Yeah, the question is, why does the draft assign carbon intensities that are negative and what considerations go into making them negative? Why do these ratings only exist for agricultural biofuels?
Yeah, so negative carbon intensities are generally associated with accounting for avoided emissions. So these are emissions that would be happening into the atmosphere, in this case of methane, that are avoided because the fuel is being captured for use in the program. So we're largely talking about dairies, in this case, and agricultural digesters and anaerobic digestion of waste and capturing methane from that. And that methane, if it were not captured, would go into the atmosphere and accelerate climate change and global warming.
Can I add one thing? And with that, we always look at an eye to existing law and regulations. And presently, that the law, there is no law prohibiting, and that's the key point, is that the agricultural, dairy and swine more specifically, are not prohibited legally from venting methane. It happens every day. So that is a difference. Now, a difference with landfills is that if to the degree that like a landfill or another facility is required to capture and flare the methane, we could not give them the same credit because they can't get credit for just following the law. But to the degree that they are allowed to flare the methane, if they use that fuel instead of flaring it, which they're allowed to do, they could claim credit for avoided CO2 emissions from not flaring it. So it's not an industry specific thing. This is just us hemming to statute, which is what we have the authority to do.
And I also wonder whether another example might also be wastewater treatment plants.
Yes.
That are not required to capture their methane,
Mhm.
and that is a waste. And so if a wastewater treatment plant decides to turn their methane into a fuel, then that would be another industry that could capture avoided emissions and have a negative CI value.
Okay.
And I know there were two parts to that question. Did we answer? I just want to make sure we answered both. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a sort of follow-on question. Why do we have combustion fuels like agricultural biofuels being assigned a lower carbon intensity score than renewables?
I feel like that's a similar, it has to do with what they're required to do under the law right now. And what fuels would involve in doing in addition to the law. We can't give credit for just following the law. You have to do that because it's the law. This is different in that we would be giving credit for going above that very basic.
And specifically avoiding emissions that would otherwise be happening. Right, so with renewable electricity generation, you're not avoiding emissions to produce that fuel.
I think this is also a good opportunity to mention that the carbon intensity values that are in the discussion draft rule, as I've mentioned several times, we do expect there to be some minor changes to the proposed rule. And those tables themselves are subject to that change as well. We are continuing to refine the methodology to estimate the carbon intensity. And as we continue to do that, we think we will come up with more accurate numbers to represent the actual life cycle. So it is possible that the numbers in those tables will change. I don't expect them to change by a lot, but they could change by the time we actually propose this rule.
Okay, per the 7th provision, will fuels from outside of New Mexico have to be delivered to New Mexico?
Literally.
Have to be literally delivered to New Mexico?
I think,
This is a book and claim question.
yeah, I think if we answer it in a complex way, yes. I think the simple answer is yes, those fuels have to be delivered to New Mexico, but there are exceptions.
Yeah, not molecule for molecule per se.
Right.
So another way to think about that is for booking claim for like electricity or for gas, somebody at the top of a pipeline or a power grid puts their fuel onto the pipeline or power grid. It all gets mixed and mingled with everything in there. The pipeline or power grid has to have deliverability into the state. And so it's a mass balance equation. You're putting it into this big network. It gets mixed with everybody else's stuff that's on this big network. And we take an equivalent amount off of that network in our state. But there still is like a physical link of the network for booking claim for where you're putting the fuel in and where we're taking it out. It has to be connected.
Great. For the 2nd provision of life cycle emissions, does the electricity used in EVs have emissions of the fuel extraction to produce the electricity, or just the production of electricity? You know,
Yes, so when you charge an EV and credits are associated with that charging, the electric that account for the full life cycle of that electricity production, including production of the fuel that went to the power plant.
Yeah, that's the well.
That's the well part of it, yeah.
okay. Is hydrogen considered a clean transportation fuel in the CTFP?
Depends. I mean, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, well, I think probably hydrogen, at least in the initial period of the rules, will be a credit generating fuel.
Yeah, and some of this is gonna come down to how the hydrogen is made, because there's many ways to make the hydrogen, and they all have different well-to-wheel emissions, and we take those into account. We take their carbon footprint or carbon intensity, and we compare it to what the target is, that breaking point of whether it's credit generating or not. And we measure it, and some types may be credit generating, and as we get stricter, may not be credit generating. Other types may be credit generating the whole time. But it's that all comes down to the details of the fuel pathways and what we find in our accounting.
For entities exempt from generating deficits under 20.2.92.102, are they required to participate in the program?
Okay, I got the reference. Can you repeat the question without it, maybe?
Exemptions.
Yes.
Yes, for entities that are exempt from generating deficits, according to that citation,
Yes.
are they required to participate in the program?
So, I think the answer hinges on what it means to participate in the program, and I'm not going to go into that. But if an exempt entity is producing a fuel under exempt conditions, we would require that they report that information to us so that we are able to do a full accounting of the fuels, but they wouldn't be earning deficits if that fuel was a deficit, potentially a deficit generating credit. So there would be no compliance obligation other than reporting to us that the fuel has been used for an exempt purpose.
Okay, so it looks like an auto acceleration mechanism was discussed in the rulemaking advisory committee. Could you share the reasoning behind deciding not to include an auto acceleration mechanism in the draft rule?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. For those of you who may not be familiar with the auto acceleration mechanism, it's a provision that California recently included in their low carbon fuel program, which basically allows for a mechanism that if the target is not only hit but exceeded, it allows for the target to jump in future years, basically to jump to a future year target in the current year. And that's seen as a credit market, credit price stabilizing mechanism. There are many things that our colleagues in California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and Canada have in their programs that we are not yet going to incorporate in our program. Our first emphasis is to get the program up and running, to get us staffed up to understand how the program works, to do a good job of diligently reviewing the reports that we get, and to make sure the compliance is buttoned up and working, that credit generation is happening, that we can verify people's deliveries. There are many, many things we have to do initially to get this program up and going. So we look forward to thinking about these other opportunities in future rulemaking. We just can't do it all right now in the first iteration.
I would just add, this is one way we are unique in how our program works. Some West Coast states have added that because they had the opposite problem that a previous questioner stated, where there were more deficits than could be covered by credits, where they are awash in credits. Great. And this is one way that they address it. We take into account sensitivities and the fact that we aren't them, and we are making a rule for us. And we would like to see how this works for us for carrying over anything that others have done.
Great. Can you be any more specific about when the first reporting and compliance period will begin? What are the factors influencing that date?
So based on the timeline that I presented earlier, if everything goes according to plan and we're able to have an effective date this fall, then we can, and feel free to chime in here if I don't get this quite right, but I think we would be able to start in the fourth quarter of this year to begin collecting reports. And then we would have all of 2026 that would be the first compliance period. And again, the compliance period is a single calendar year. And then in 2027 is when we would begin our annual review of the first year, including the one quarter from this year. And that's when we would be able to verify the credits and deficits that have been issued.
So let me just make sure that Paul did say it, but it might, so I want to make sure it's clear. The first compliance period will start whenever we stand up the program and begin the reporting. So that could be October 1, it could be October 14th, it could be October 31st, it could be November 29th. We don't really know when that first date will be, but that will be the start of the compliance period, and it will end then on the 31st of 2026. So in the first example, it will not necessarily be a calendar year. All subsequent years, it'll be calendar years.
Okay. And then this is, okay. So Camilla with the Sierra Club says, we've been really excited to see the three-pronged approach to reducing transportation pollution. The Clean Cars and Trucks rule, EV tax credits, and the Clean Fuels program. We appreciate the administration's leadership. The question is, have you reviewed and considered updates to the California rule? It seems that there have been some serious issues with negative credits for biofuels. How are you addressing that?
Well, it seems as though we talked about that a little bit already, right? So if avoided emissions are indeed avoided emissions, then our program right now would allow for that. We're going to, anybody who's proposing to sell a fuel in New Mexico that has avoided emissions will have to either present their fuel pathway from another state or have us do the analysis of that fuel pathway. A note on our local dairies, we do a different form of dry farming dairy. It's called dry lot dairy in New Mexico that does not tend to produce a lot of methane emissions. And therefore, our local dairies will have to be more creative about what kinds of alternatives will be available for them to be able to take advantage of some of the credit, the manure to fuel pathway. So it's not likely to have quite the same effect that some people believe has been happening in California.
And if I could just add a little bit to help answer the other part of Camilla's question. Yeah, we have been staying up to date about all three of the other states' programs. I believe all three of them are currently going through a rulemaking. And so we are staying up to date, and we're staying in conversation with those other programs to understand the changes that they are making, and trying to understand why they're being asked to do that or why they're considering it for adoption. And so we are continuing to make sure that we learn why those other programs are changing, how they're changing, and what that could mean for New Mexico. And just to Claudia's point a moment ago, we do want to make sure that we get the basic program up and running before we start considering complex changes that some other states may have or may have not adopted. We just want to make sure we have a solid program before we implement those more complex pieces.
Okay, does NMED intend to release for public comment the data, calculations, models, and assumptions made to reach the 2018 baseline numbers, lookup table CIs, and fuel densities? And then there's a second part. When will the NM GREET model be made available?
I'll take this one. So we will release the data, calculations, models, assumptions, documentation around our calculations for both the 2018 baseline numbers and the lookup table carbon intensities. Those will be released as part of our petition or not part of our petition, sorry. They'll be released as part of our technical testimony before the hearing. So any public comment on those would go to the Environmental Improvement Board as part of the hearing. As Holt mentioned, we are still in the process of tweaking some of those assumptions and numbers, and we should expect some of those numbers to change in ways. The fuel densities, I believe our fuel densities are exactly the same as the other three states that have adopted these rules. So I don't think we'll have any further documentation we're releasing around those. And the NM GREET model or whatever version of GREET we decide we are using will probably be released along with the documentation for our technical testimony.
Can I just follow up with that? If you have some particular concerns, the person who asked this question and would like to meet with us, that's true for any of you, actually, but if there's this question and the next question seem to be very targeted, and if there's conversations we can have so that we can help understand what you're looking for or provide you information so that you can understand our methodology, then we're happy to have those conversations.
Okay, next question is, why are non-drop-in fuels like hydrogen excluded from the alternative jet fuel definition in the draft rule?
I would say, let us take a look at that. Maybe you can, again, I want to just, I'm not sure we intended it to be that way. And it's also possible, anyway, so perhaps give us a little bit more clarifying information about what you're seeing. Red line versions of the language with proposed changes are always valuable to us. So please just circle back around with us on that.
Are other states able to buy into this program, like in California's LCFS, which this program is modeled on?
If I understand this question correctly, maybe you're asking about the compatibility of credits across states. So right now they are, every state has their own program. So a transportation fuel credit generated in New Mexico can only be used in New Mexico. Likewise, a deficit that is accrued in New Mexico has to be offset with a clean transportation fuel credit from New Mexico. That's the way the other states work too. So are other states able to buy into this program? Other states can adopt their own rules and develop their own programs.
Yeah.
I mean, there could be that there's a future in which the 4 programs and any other states that decide to join could make a more regional kind of a market, but that is definitely not part of what we're proposing here today.
And I'll say, not other states, but fuel producers in other states and fuel importers from other states can import fuels to New Mexico to participate in
This
the
person
program.
just clarified as in pathways.
Yes. So our rules will allow pathways from other states to be transferred to New Mexico with our preliminary review. Once we start accepting individual fuel pathways.
And so for people who may not know as much as Emily here and asking this question, what this means is that we are assuming we are categorizing fuels to have certain CI values or carbon footprints in broad categories, but there are many people who make very unique fuels who seek their own carbon intensity value for their unique fuel. And seeking that carbon intensity value is called seeking a pathway for their carbon intensity. And so some producers already have a CI value because their fuel might go from the Midwest to California. And if they want to start having that fuel come to New Mexico and they already have a carbon intensity for that fuel in California, this is kind of the reciprocity concept that this person is asking about.
Yeah, I would just add, the nexus is always, even if you transfer your pathway, we care about the volume of the fuels that are delivered to commuters in our state. And so or if your facilities in our state that are produced in our state, but in any case, fuel that goes to New Mexico commuters is the nexus in all cases. And in that spirit, fuels from other states pathways that are delivered to New Mexico do need to have some adjustments, obviously, to their carbon intensity because of the fact that they're getting delivered here and not in those other states. And so there's oil to pump.
Yeah. And Emily, I'll add one more thing for you. In our draft discussion rules, we actually require that if you have a fuel pathway for the fuel in one of the other states with the similar program, you must reapply using that same pathway application rather than a novel pathway application to New Mexico.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Do you have any insight on why the lookup table carbon intensity for biomethane from landfill gas CNG is higher than fossil natural gas CNG?
Yes, so this is one of the odd things that made its way into our draft discussion rule. So that's definitely one of the carbon intensities that you're going to see adjusted. That's in our draft discussion rule. Inadvertently, we left out the avoided CO2 emissions for the biomethane from landfill gas in that lookup table value. So you'll see that value adjusted downwards in the next draft of our rule.
Are you considering the CARB, California Air Resource Board, LCFS 2024 amendments, or just the existing LCFS requirements?
I think we've addressed that question already.
Okay. Clarifying on the compliance periods, is the intention that any compliance period opening in 2025 would require deficit generators to turn in credits to show compliance, or would the 2025 year be a reporting only year?
Do you want
Yeah.
to?
So the intention is that any reporting in 2025 would generate deficits and credits, but it would be part of the next compliance year. So you will not need to satisfy those deficits until you're doing your compliance year 2026 reporting.
So there's a couple questions from the same person. So regarding the formula for credit generation, am I understanding correctly that after an FSE site recovers 1.5 times CapEx costs minus grant funds received, it is not eligible to generate more credits associated with the fuel dispensed there? If so, what is the reasoning behind the cap?
So it would still be eligible to generate fuel credits for the fuel sold. There's the FSE credits are credits kind of on top of what a charging station gets for the fuel it sells. And it's only meant to provide and encourage FSE getting developed in areas where markets are less well known and are a little more risky, because that is what provides infrastructure benefits and fuel sales where there otherwise would not be in communities that don't have a big market for them. Once you've,
Can you say what FSE is?
oh, fuel supply equipment, charging stations and the like. If you have received these credits that are kind of used to, again, help mitigate risk from building these stations, and that credit is already that credit plus your grant revenue is all of your investment plus another 50%. We determine that that's a point where your risk has been adequately covered, and you can still make money from selling the fuel, which is hopefully, as we've covered your risk and you've built these stations, what then pays out the remainder of that investment.
Okay, and so first a clarifying question. It looks like the approval of FSC applications will be approved on first come, first served basis. And there are restrictions to the approval of new pathways, such as 1 FSC per zip code. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Sort of. Sorry.
There's a lot in there.
Okay.
Yeah, for the first come, first served basis, yes.
Yeah.
The restrictions, it's 1 FSE of the same fuel type for the same vehicle duty type. We're trying to prevent double dipping on these extra credits in areas where somebody has already stepped in and provided equipment to supply similar vehicles on similar fuels and given that value that is needed. There is no prohibition, however, whether you get these FSC credits or not, on continuing to build the station and get both revenue from selling the fuel and credits for the fuel sold. Nothing stops you from doing that in this program. You want to build a station where someone's getting FSE credits for that fuel type and vehicle type? Build it. I mean, it's not for me to say, but like, you'll still get money from building it. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Is there a way for applicants to know where they are in the queue of this first?
I believe it's our intention to publish the queue.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe, Owen, do you have any addition to that? No. Okay.
Okay, so I'm just trying to know understand if this is something you already answered.
Are you talking about Tom's question?
Yes, I guess you said that his question's now been answered. Okay, but can you point out the section of the reg that would show how dispensed credits would be calculated?
Dispensed.
Just the regular calculation for dispensed fuels. I don't have that section ready to go off the top of my head, so I am, as we speak, just scrolling through the rules on my end. And I think if there's a good break after the next question or the next answer that we give,
Sure.
I can follow up with the answer to that.
Okay.
Okay, we'll work on
We'll
that.
circle back. And then the last question that we have right now is, if a third-party verification is completed for a pathway that has been recertified from another state, do we need to complete an additional third-party verification for the recertified pathway in New Mexico?
I'm not sure we entirely know the answer to that question yet, so we might have to clarify among ourselves and get back to you on that.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is all the questions we have at the moment.
I'm sorry, I still do not have an answer to that question. If someone else in this room does, feel free to jump in. But I'll just to give some transparency to the folks on the presentation. Part of what we're doing with the draft is converting very accessible visual equations into text that then can become the rules legally. And so part of that transformation, it makes it a little bit harder to find the key equations that exist in the rules just from our end. So that's just to give you transparency on why it's taking so
So
long.
the math is described verbally.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
It's section 3, it should be section 301 for the fuel credits, and then 302 through 304 cover the fuel supply equipment credits. It's nice to have equations as milestones to find them, but we'll get there.
Okay,
Well, we just got another one, I think.
okay, one more.
Again, with NM GREET. So we intend to publish what model we're using and NM GREET, or the version of GREET we're using, as part of the technical testimony before we have our rulemaking hearing.
Okay, I just want to give everyone a chance here. Maybe if you're not able to type into the chat for some reason, if you need to come off of mute to ask a question, I think now would be the right time to do that. And if we don't have any more questions, then I think we can wrap things up. All right.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Sure. I'm not sure. Can you introduce
Can you hear
yourself,
me?
please?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
Todd Campbell with Clean Energy. I apologize. I wasn't able to see the full presentation. Will this be posted on the website for folks to review, or is there any
Yes.
chance to be able to see it?
Yes, so we have recorded this presentation, and we intend to make the recording and the PowerPoint presentation itself available on our website.
Great, thank you.
No problem. All right, any other questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for your attendance. We really appreciate everyone engaging on this really important rulemaking effort. Again, make sure that you're staying up to date with our website or subscribing to our listserv to stay up to date with what is happening. We look forward to seeing some of you at that hearing, hopefully. And don't forget to get your comments in for the discussion draft rule. Those are due on the 17th of this month at 5 p.m. We appreciate your time and thank you very much. Bye.